makes a place in Warcraft enjoyable, rewarding to play through, or for whatever reason, just good, worth remembering, or deserving of another visit? Is it the lore and story setting, the quests, the player interactions you might have had there, the music and ambiance, that cozy feeling you get while you're there, or the memories and nostalgia it brings to the surface? Whether you're still playing today or have moved on and are reliving your glory days vicariously through the internet, everyone who has played WoW has memories of the game that are simply inseparable from the places we journey through as players. Maybe that means running your first dungeon, going back to your starter zone to buy your first mount, looting your first BOE epic, or just that sense of wonder you get from looking at the areas you never get to explore and never quite had an explanation for. Settlements, towns, cities, dungeons, and zones. These are the building blocks that make up the world of Azeroth and give us as players a canvas to write our experiences, adventures, and memories on, be they old or new. Whatever it might be for you, there's something special about every place in World of Warcraft, something that makes each of them unique, for better or for worse. I've been wanting to create a series for some time that explores the world of Azeroth and attempts to capture the essence of what it is exactly that makes each place in WoW so memorable and so timeless. So join me as I explore some of our favorite areas in Azeroth, their history and lore, map layout and design, quest lines, loot, player interactions, and memories to hopefully answer the question, what is it that makes this place so special? For the inaugural episode, we'll be heading to the enchanted forest of Ashenvale. I figured we'd start here for one, because this was an iconic zone in WoW's heyday, where many of us cut our teeth in a contested zone for the very first time. And because if you plan on playing Season of Discovery, you're going to be spending a lot of time here during the first phase. So why not begin with the lore of the zone, which takes us way back to some of Azeroth's most ancient history. Ashenvale has been part of the territories that make up the ancestral homeland of the Night Elves for a very long time, and technically it comprises the entire forested area of northern Kalimdor, including Felwood and parts of Azshara and Mount Hyjal. Ashenvale has always been under the watch of the Night Elves, but it wasn't until after the War of the Ancients and the Great Sundering that they settled in the area in a more permanent fashion. For those that don't know, the War of the Ancients is a very significant conflict in the Warcraft universe. In it, Queen Azshara's experiments with magic attracted the attention of a Dark Titan named Sargeras. She fell under his influence and opened a wayline for Sargeras and his Burning Legion to enter Azeroth through the Well of Eternity, which was the primary source of magic for all Elven society. The demonic legion wreaked havoc on the Night Elves and their territories, even killing several of their wild gods, animal demigods that helped the elves maintain a balance and attunement with the natural world. Despite suffering heavy losses, the Night Elves were eventually able to stop the onslaught by destroying the Well of Eternity, which caused the Great Sundering, a catastrophic event that shattered the world and destroyed most of the Elven territories in the process. The surviving Night Elves retreated to the areas of their homeland that survived the Sundering and founded a new society, which explicitly banned the use of arcane magic and instead stood isolated from the rest of the world to commune with nature and revive their druidic traditions. And so they remained for over 10,000 years, defending and reforming their lands and culture up until the Third War erupted, and they were forced out of isolation to confront not only the Burning Legion again, but the encroaching Horde, who was starting to gain a foothold in the forests of Ashenvale. The arrival of the orcs in Ashenvale can be credited to Grommash Hellscream, who was sent there on a petty errand by Thrall to gather lumber, more than anything as a punishment for his inability to contain the murderous fits he would go into as a result of the demonic blood curse afflicting the entire orcish race. In Ashenvale, Grom allied with goblins in the forest to establish the Warsong lumber operation, which drew the ire of the Night Elves enough for them to mount an attack, marking the first battle in a territorial dispute that would span the next several years. The conflict between the orcs and the Night Elves would eventually see Grom and his outriders consuming more blood from the Pit Lord Manaroth, empowering them to slaughter the Night Elves and the last surviving wild god Cenarius, but unbeknownst to the orcs, this would renew their curse and strengthen Manaroth's hold over them once again. After defeating the Night Elves, Grom realized his error and set out to rectify it with Thrall by killing Manaroth in Ashenvale. This is where Grom famously slayed the Pit Lord, but lost his own life in the process, an event that finally saw the entire orc race freed from the yoke of the blood curse, thanks to Grom's sacrifice.
I have freed myself. No, old friend. You freed us all.
Which brings us to where we are today. While the Night Elves were distracted by the Burning Legion and the encroaching horde, Ashenvale had grown wild again, now teeming with spiders, wolves, bears, satyrs, elementals, and furbolg tribes, as well as a few demon holdouts here and there. And the Alliance and Horde forces in Ashenvale are locked in a seemingly endless territorial dispute, a dispute which plays out eternally in the Warsong Gulch battleground, where the factions back either the Warsong Outriders, who defend the Horde's lumber operations, or the Silverwing Sentinels, who are trying to restore the natural order of their former home. And that just about does it for the lore. So, as someone who usually plays Horde, finally getting to Ashenvale has always meant a hugely welcome change of scenery from the bleak, orange landscapes of Durotar and the Barrens that make up your first 20 levels. I remember the very first time I ever walked into Ashenvale, coming up through the Morshound Rampart and being so intrigued by the dark, glimmering forest you can see just beyond the Barrens border. And then when you finally cross the threshold, and you know the relative safety of the starting territories is no longer there to depend on. At the same time, the enchanting music starts playing. There's really no better way to describe the feeling of high adventure WoW gives you when you get into your early and mid-20s. Ashenvale's map runs east to west, bordered by the Barrens and the Stone Talon Mountains in the south, Darkshore in the northwest, and by high-level zones Fellwood in the north and Ashara in the east. Its layout is pretty obviously designed to force interactions between Alliance and Horde players, and it's really at the distinct inconvenience of the Horde in my opinion. Their secondary quest hub, the Zoramgar Outpost, has you running directly by both Alliance quest hubs to get there. In fact, the primary Alliance town in Ashenvale, Astranar, is situated along the main road leading west, which means if you're Horde and you let yourself auto-run toward Astranar instead of bearing right or left, you're in for a not-so-balanced encounter with the town guards. Astranar itself is a memorable quest hub, set on a serene little lake with all the familiar trappings of a Night Elf settlement. A big comfy inn, glimmering torii gates, houses with NPCs, a few of which put you on long epic quest lines. There's even a reagent vendor and a leatherworking trainer here. And while the leveling experience for the Horde in Ashenvale can be memorable, I don't think their quest hubs are, especially when compared to the Alliance's. Splinter Tree Post is pretty empty. I mean, there's even a cave that tempts you to go in and explore, but it's completely empty save for the Tauren standing right at the entrance. You're not going to find yourself getting cozy here like you might in Astranar. More likely, you'll do your turn-ins and head right back out to the grind. The Zoramgar Outpost isn't really a standout town either. It doesn't even have an innkeeper, but as far as efficiency goes, at least it gives you a solid concentration of quests you can bang out in quick succession. Maestra's Post is another Alliance hub that most players venturing in from Darkshore will begin their journeys in Ashenvale at, and it doesn't really hold a candle to Astranar either. Hardly any NPCs, no inn, no flight path, none of the conveniences you might look for in your favorite town. But zooming out, I think what makes these quest hubs memorable and the zone experience as a whole is the placement of the hubs, which are put so close together that we start to see some of those forced interactions between enemy factions I was getting at earlier. In fact, most of the PvP encounters I remember in Ashenvale took place just outside of Maestra's Post as I was on my way to the Zoram Strand. Either that, or for some reason by the Goblin with the Shredder operating manual quest. Placing the outpost in this way causes you to run into members of the opposite faction naturally, and when you're just hitting a contested zone, it's hard to resist the temptation that you get when you see your first few red nameplates floating around. It seems like everyone is eager to get some gameplay variety in your early 20s, whereas toward the later levels, PvP can feel like more of an inconvenience and a distraction from the grind to 60. Low-level PvP is just simple and enjoyable. It's before everyone has their full class kit, a bag full of engineering toys and trinkets and the like, just you, a handful of core abilities, and a guy on the other side of the screen. And at least in my experience, Ashenvale has been pleasantly spared from the more toxic PvP play you'll find in zones like Hillsbrad or STV, where half the time you'll find yourself getting camped by higher level toons with nothing better to do. But of course, Ashenvale isn't just faction quest hubs and PvP. There are some notable points of interest in the zone worth mentioning. Black Fathom Deeps, the area dungeon, and the site of Season of Discovery's first raid is one of those. It's the ruins of an ancient Night Elf temple that spans a large underground area, which is now overtaken by Satyr, Naga, and Twilight cultists. Xavian, which is the upper part of Satirnar, is another one. Notable to me because its name implies an association with Xavius, who was the chief advisor to Queen Eschara leading up to the events of the Great Sundering. Demonfall Canyon, the site of Grom and Manaroth's final showdown, where a monument to Grom sits on top of the charred land where the explosion that killed him occurred. Actually, to further memorialize this event, Manaroth's armor can be found outside of Gromish Hold in Orgrimmar. Bow Shadow, an area with tons of high-level elite green dragonkin, where one of the Nightmare World dragons can spawn, in front of a portal that presumably connects to the Emerald Dream. And various elven ruins, the Forest Song, the ruins at the Zoram Strand and into BFD, and my favorite, the Shrine of Asina, due west of Astronar, which has a giant fallen statue protruding just outside. The ruins throughout Ashenvale just provide a level of depth to the zone that makes you feel like you're playing through a place of legends past, juxtaposed with the relatively new settlements established by both the Alliance and the Horde. As far as quests go, both sides get some degree of variety in the questing experience in Ashenvale, battling furbolgs, cleansing tainted elementals, cutting down the enemy faction, exploring ancient ruins and the like, but to me, the Alliance definitely went out as far as the quality of quests are concerned. Don't get me wrong, the Horde does have some memorable quests. The one that stands out to me most is Toric's Assault, where you join a band of orcs in a raid on a nearby Night Elf outpost. It functions kind of like an escort quest, and can be kind of annoying in the way that classic WoW escort quests can be, but it's one of the few quests that really puts you in the middle of the faction conflict, and does an awesome job at capturing that feeling, where you just teamed up with a few orc grunts and you get to charge headlong into battle to topple an enemy holding. The other notable Horde quest to me is Warsong Supplies, but it's mainly memorable for the loot. You'll get to choose from 3 really strong rare quality items, the Warsong Sash, Warsong Boots, or the Warsong Gauntlets. The quest isn't super quick to complete. You'll need to get items from the Furbolgs and Satyrs, and usually you'll want to bundle that effort up with the other quests for those enemy types. For example, the quest to collect Satyr Horns, which is an honorable mention on the list, conveniently sends you to the same place that you get the Warsong Oil from, which I mentioned earlier in the video when talking about Xavian. The Satyrs there are in their high 20s and tanky, and some of them have demon minions, and some of them can ambush you out of stealth, and worst of all, they can give you a 5-minute long curse that gives you 6-second stun heart attacks that can chain. Not the funnest thing to deal with. For the Warsong Supplies, you'll also need to go all the way to Booty Bay for a shipment of axes, and lastly for the Saw Blades, you'll need to trade a deadly blunderbuss for them to a goblin in Splinter Tree, which means you either need to be an engineer to make one, get an engineer friend to make one for you, or buy one on the auction house. Quests like these are part of what makes Classic classic. They have you running all over the world, interacting with other players, spanning your entire experience of the zone to get what you need for it, but in this case the reward is definitely worth the effort. On the Alliance side, I like the Mage Summoner quest, which is one that definitely got more popular as a must-do during Hardcore's rise in popularity. Completing that quest gets you the Light of Elune, which is an item you can use to protect yourself against all damage for 10 seconds. And as useful as that item is for Hardcore, I actually like the quest because it forces Alliance players to go into the Horde-controlled Barrens, up to Dreadmist Peak to deal with an undead mage, Cerulus Foulborn, who has been corrupting elementals at Mistral Lake. WoW Classic always did a fantastic job of making you feel really uneasy when you're forced to walk through the enemy territory, so I really enjoy quests that facilitate this type of interaction. But by far, the best quest in Ashenvale is the Alliance questline, Rain's Cleansing. This quest has you working with the Night Elves and some of their Dryad allies to cut back on Furbolg attacks taking place in the area. To do so, there's a very long quest chain that has you traveling all over the zone to reform a transformation rod. You need to locate its parts from treants and oozes, then go charge it at a hidden shrine, and eventually use it to transform into a Furbolg in order to communicate with them, leading you to kill one of their corrupted leaders on another Furbolg's behalf. It's a long and arduous quest, but its length, story, and variety really help flesh out the sense of epicness that you get from it, especially for being such a low-level chain. And once you finish it, you can get the Glacial Stone, which is a really good two-handed mace for that level. Or if you decide not to finish it after you create the Dartol's Rod of Transformation, you can keep the rod instead and use it to transform yourself into a Furbolg for 3 minutes whenever you want. So if you're a fan of cosmetic items, this one's definitely a keeper. And as far as standout quests go in Ashenvale, that's really it on my list. So to wrap that all up, what is it that makes Ashenvale so memorable? When you boil it all down, for me it comes down to 3 things. 1, it's one of the first contested areas you get to, and sets you off into the game in earnest. You really get the sense of adventure and conflict here, and the early PvP that can happen only contributes to that. 2, Ashenvale has a really close proximity to the major lore events of the game, both recent and ancient. Now, outside of the faction conflict, that lore isn't really referenced in any of the quests, and that's kind of what makes this point for me. I think it's really cool when you're able to play through areas that had huge lore significance in the past, and the events that shape why we're here in the first place. But the events themselves aren't really mentioned, and they're definitely not spoon-fed to you in an annoying way. And third, it's just a great environment, plain and simple. An enchanted forest with soft illumination, glowing bodies of water, ruins, an interesting map design, enemies you don't fight all that often like Furbolgs and Satyrs, and a really cool soundtrack. As far as WoW zones go, Ashenvale just kinda does it for me. So lastly, if we were to objectively rate Ashenvale, is it a good zone or not? Well, I'd say kind of. I think nostalgia and environment carry a lot of weight here, but outside of a few standouts, the quests in Ashenvale aren't really that great, and overall the leveling experience is kind of disjointed, and not necessarily in the charming way that many other WoW zones and questlines are known for. Even so, I'll always make sure to make a pit stop in Ashenvale during my leveling journey, just to soak it in and do a few of my favorite quests. And that's pretty much it for the video. What are some of your favorite memories in Ashenvale? Are there quests, places, or secrets you wish I'd mentioned? Or are there other zones and places you'd like to see videos like this for? Let me know in the comments. Also, I'm curious to hear what you guys think about the video format. I want to put out more videos that are less tied to the current WoW headlines, and I have fun with this sort of retro style stuff. And it's also something that can be challenging to navigate between the live version of Era, nostalgia-based content, Season of Discovery, and whatever comes next. But I think there's going to be room for some interesting crossover content as we see potential changes to vanilla, and maybe even room for new vanilla lore content. Who knows? And lastly, if you're enjoying my videos, please consider leaving me a sub. I'm a new creator trying to hit my stride, and every signal I get from you guys in the early days really helps keep my motivation up, so I'd really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching. Till next time.